You're listening in on an animated discussion about the new Batman adventures with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from thecinematropolis.com. And today's topic is old wounds. All right, Joshua, we are at a crossroads between you and I where we have to have this conversation about a thing that we've said we're going to have a conversation about for a while, at least in part today. Can we agree that we'll still be friends after this episode's done recording?
No. I'm going to throw my costume at you and storm out like a petulant child, going against years of characterization set up by the same creative team.
Are you also going to bring my girlfriend into the mix here and try to and use that as an attempt to keep me on this podcast?
What an absolutely wild swerve. Boy, yes, that's what I'll do. I will both be the one who storms out and the one who tries to get the band back together using your girlfriend.
Joshua, I would say, I mean, no offense, but that sounds like some bad dad attitude, okay?
Yeah, that is not good friend behavior, and it's even worse parent behavior, and boy, will we get into it. You know what's interesting about this episode? I think that we might be moving into a space on both New Batman Adventures and Superman the Animated Series where finding any new designs to talk about is going to be really tricky. Like, I think they've kind of found their stride, and I know that there's a lot of fourth world stuff coming in Superman, so we're going to have more designs to talk about over there. But here we are, like deep in the first season of NBA and deep in the second season of Superman, and isn't anybody new here. Not for us.
The only thing I can come up with is we see Dick Grayson in the Robin outfit, and it looks kind of awkward because he's a little older. But and that's not really a new design. It's the same design we've seen before, just with a bigger person. So,
with a bigger person, and they flattened it out for the animation style. But otherwise, it's the same Robin outfit that we had on BTAS. So, okay.
So Joshua, we're going to get into the weeds on this episode, but maybe we could just start with our overall thoughts on the episode as an episode before we get into the content.
Absolutely.
Because here's my thing. I think you and I are probably going to differ in opinion on maybe some of the story characterization decisions they make here. But I will say, as an episode, I think they bit off way more than they could chew in a one-parter. Because I actually think there is a version of this that does a lot of the ideas much better that's a two-parter. And because it feels like we only get one half of the story, and it happens to be the half of the story that feels petulant, even though I don't think it is. It just, there was meat left on the bone. And because of that, I feel like we got a less than satisfying explanation for why Dick Grayson and Batman broke up.
That is really interesting. I don't actually think that what we see in this episode needs another episode, honestly. I think it holds together fine for what they were trying to do. Also recognizing that I think they put a bunch of duct tape and chicken wire on it. We'll get to that in a minute. But I mean, like, this episode holds together. It does what it wants it to do. Now, if you'd given me a part 2 where somehow Robin manages to get the same story from Bruce's perspective, that would have been really interesting. Like a Rashomon of this to find some kind of middle ground, Oh, that would have been interesting and maybe worthwhile.
Well, and that's what I was getting at, because I feel like we only get Dick's perspective, and I think his anger is justified for the most part. And I also feel like consistently Bruce Wayne and Batman is pretty all over the place in this episode. I think the seeds are there for there to be another side where you're like, okay, this is a little more justified, versus it just comes across as bad dad across the board. Whereas if you have another one that's his point of view, maybe you can sort of synthesize the breakup to be a little more mutual versus, well, yeah, Batman's just being a jerk. He's a bad dad. He's not showing up. He's making me cancel my date with my girlfriend. He's then telling my girlfriend a big secret about me. A lot of bad decisions there that, again, would never, are not really good decisions anyway, how you spin it. But I just think that there could have been another half where you're like, okay, well, maybe A, Batman has regrets about how it went. I'm sure he did. And B, like maybe give us a little more of his side about why he decided to make specific decisions, because they seem like the reveal to Barbara Gordon just feels so out of left field and not his thing to do, and so cold to Dick that he would reveal the secret identity shenanigans. It doesn't feel quite like it makes sense with what we get from Batman in this episode.
I think you're right that it doesn't entirely make sense with a Batman that we've been watching since the beginning of BTAS. I think it works well enough within the four corners of this episode. But I think that the biggest thing a Rashomon approach with Bruce giving his side would have done for me is it would have opened it up for this episode to treat Dick like an unreliable narrator. Because this really feels to me... Now, I don't think the creators meant to do this. I have found a behind-the-scenes tidbit. I'm 100% death of the author on all this stuff, but sometimes it's useful to chat about what they're doing, even if it's not the most important part of the conversation. But I just feel like in this episode, even Dick doesn't come out looking good, right? Like nobody except Barbara comes out of this episode on top, like looking like anything like their best selves. And I think that in the absence of a reason to read him as an unreliable narrator, this kind of show expects us to read him as a reliable narrator.
Yes.
I think that's the expectation. But if we had an opposing viewpoint in Bruce, even if it wasn't opposing on purpose, like even if Tim kind of cajoled it out of him, it would leave us a space where we could treat Dick like an unreliable narrator. And I actually think this episode gets a lot better if we realize that Dick has brought a lot of his own baggage to those interactions that didn't necessarily have anything to do with Bruce in that moment.
Right. And what I will say, too, is I kind of like that everyone comes out not looking like them best selves. That's what makes it interesting drama. They all have different. They all have different interests in most of the time we see them aligned. We're working together. Here's what we want. But this is a great example of going behind the scenes to see the challenges of actually doing this like crime fighting thing while trying to balance a normal, happy life.
A life, a family, a whole. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's there. And I think getting a little messy is actually really compelling. And again, I kind of like that not everyone comes out looking great because that's just how these sorts of things work. The thing that's really important, though, is that you need to really understand why everyone is doing what they're doing for all of the drama to really have maximum impact. And it just didn't. It felt like it came across feeling like Dick was being, like you said, Joshua, a petulant child.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely throws multiple fits in his own flashbacks, which is such a wild thing to admit with no chagrin, you know? I mean, even if he thinks taking a swing at Batman and throwing his stuff at his costume at Batman is justified, the whole like middle of the night visit to Barbara where he just gets frustrated and storms out is just like, wow, this is tough stuff. It also, and this is saying something considering we've been at this since BTAS, it also feels like extremely mature storytelling in that these are adult people acting like imperfect adult people. And I'm just like asking a question we haven't had to ask since BTAS. Who's this show for again?
Right. Well,
you know.
Yeah. And again, like I think there is a way for you to do it in a family friendly way that is engaging and relatable to families, including children.
Yeah,
you know, I just don't think, and to do it successfully while also feeling true to the characters. This episode, I just feel like takes a lot of shortcuts that does not allow it to fully realize that potential.
No, I agree. Now, let me talk about some good stuff because I think we agree about this. And then we'll come back to all of the character interactions. Because I think those character interactions are the meat of what will or will not be our disagreement. So I lied when I said Barbara was the only one who comes out of this looking good. Joker looks great.
Oh, my gosh.
I think that his stuff is awesome.
A+ Joker. You know, no one does going back to the phrase we've used in the past, the workman-like Joker. They're like, we need a bad guy to do a crazy thing. Well, let's just bring in the Joker. Let's just have him. Yeah, he's going to hold the city hostage for a bunch of money. And Batman's like, well, he's probably going to blow the city up anyway, so we got to stop him. You know, like it's all of it is A++. I mean, like, listen here. The line, you should be sidewalk Stromanov. Oh. And then Dick says, I changed the menu. I laughed so hard. It's so good.
It's fantastic. I also really, really appreciated the you just must like shaking glass out of your shorts.
Oh
because anytime, I mean, if there's any villain in the entirety of the DC universe that has seen the big scary Batman entrance so many times, he's bored by it and can make a good joke about it, this is our guy. Joker is our guy. It's a really good Joker plot, considering, I guess I'll just say it like I did in my notes. It's a flashback and they didn't have to go this hard, but I'm glad they went this hard.
Yeah, no, again, this is really like, these are the things that set Joker aside as like the best or one of the best DCAU villains, is because even when they're just using him to fill a void of a villain, they knock it out of the park every time. He's funny. The plot makes, the plot aligns with what you'd expect from the Joker. And there's still some curveballs, the self-awareness. I liked his line about when Batgirl shows up, he's like, oh, finally someone other than the boy Blunder. I mean, just everything is so perfect with the use of him in this episode.
Yep. Yeah. I feel like almost with this crew, when you force them to tighten up their Joker stuff, it gets better. You know, like if they had the full 22 minutes to just do a Joker episode, we'd still get a lot of this good stuff, I think, but it might get like diffused across some less good stuff, but when they are forced to just pull the four corners of an episode together and give us some Joker at just the right moments with just the right amount of Jokerness, they really nail it. I mean, I think we saw that with the kind of Christmas anthology episode too. Like Joker's bit was very short, but it was just perfectly Joker, A++ Joker stuff. I really like that. I also wanted to point out that we have a move in this episode that I don't think we've seen since BTAS, and it's actually a move that I've kind of been worn out on in other media, actually. I don't know what other people call this. I pull in a chipperish term, a term coined by my Listen Up A-Holes co-host, Lonnie Diane Rich. It's the irony smash, right? When you say a thing and then you smash cut to something else that undercuts that moment.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a certain, creator of a certain vampire slayer who has made these hateful to me. Like, I just don't like them 99% of the time. But this whole thing about maybe he had car trouble and then cuts to Batman hanging on the outside of a car in a high-speed chase. It's a good gag. I like it. And I don't know that we've seen it since BTAS, and I'm not sure we've seen it used as well since the Two-Face introduction, because they did it like 3 or 4 times back to back with Harvey Dent. I love this so much.
Again, these are the things that I think really stick out about the DCAU and the use of the Joker, is these are the moments they nail. These, like, again, workman-like scenarios. They're not like overly complicated. They're simple crime fighting. They understand what works about the Joker. They understand what works about Batman, and they've got a good sense of humor. So I'm right there with you. Last line I got to throw out there. Again, I laughed a lot in this episode is when the Joker went after Robin
supposedly pathos-filled episode, and we're just cackling like fools because the Joker is good.
He's so good. Right after Robin knocks the hyenas off of him, the Joker goes, "Hey, do I hit your kids?" And he's like, "Oh, actually, I do."
That was uncomfortably funny. Yes.
Yeah. Just, again, really clever writing, and Mark Hamill hitting home run after home run. So, Joshua, of course, the laughs are so good, and I think at least I needed that to offset the really very heavy drama stuff. And again, I say heavy. It's not that it was too heavy for this show. It just felt like a lot. Almost like a little too much for, like, again, one episode, or really one portion of an episode. And because it's just like character betrayal, upset. It was a lot. So I guess let's start with characterizations, because I think that's also going to be it's something I think we should look at between Dick Grayson and Batman. Like, do you think that this characterization of Batman works in any capacity for this universe?
Well, I mean, okay, I think it could, okay? Like, I really think that it could work. And to be honest, This is very in line with a lot of the comic book characterization at the time, where Bruce and Dick were estranged. They had not gotten along in a long time. They weren't even really speaking. Bruce had basically moved on entirely to the comic book version of Tim Drake as Robin. Tim and Dick would have interactions, but Dick and Bruce really wouldn't for a long time. It's not wildly off from how it was more or less in roughly the same time in the comics. Like, there's some hedge there, because this is right about the time they realized that dynamic did not have as much storytelling juice as a family that actually worked together and spoke to one another, because you can't have any more family drama if they don't talk to one another. But at the same time, I think it could work. Here's the thing that I discovered just this week that I think confirms the main thing that upsets me, because I think that I have explained poorly that the main thing that upsets me about this is that it's bad characterization for Batman. I don't think it's bad characterization for Batman per se. It's not what I'd prefer. It is not my preference for this dynamic, but it's not bad. What has bothered me more, what does make it bad, is that it is a massive break. And I mean a massive break from the Batman that we saw in Batman the Animated Series. And I have wondered a lot. Was that an accident? Was it a choice? How did they get there? It looks like a purposeful choice, but it looks like a purposeful choice that gets executed poorly. And so here's what I discovered. I'm going to shout out another podcast, the DCAU Watchtower podcast. Pretty good bunch of guys doing similar but different work to what we're doing here. And that squad had a video that talked about how the Burton Batman movies influenced BTAS, but then BTAS influenced New Batman Adventures, which then influenced the Schumacher movies, which then influenced New Batman Adventures all over again. Like, it was this big Ouroboros of influences moving from the movies to the TV show and back. Really surprised me how much flow through there was between those. And in that video, they dug up some interviews with the creators that were contemporary with when this stuff was coming out, okay? And what the show creators specifically said is that the Schumacher films resulted in them getting notes to lighten the tone of the show. And they did that with more actual light. We've talked about that, like actual lighter colors. And this is the big one, bigger, weirder action set pieces, okay? So I get it. Makes sense, right? That's what the kids are going to the movies for. Let's give them a little more of that in the show. But to make sure that the show didn't stray into Batman 66 territory, to which I say, you cowards, they gruffed Batman up on purpose to keep him dark. They very specifically write fewer lines for him. And when they do write lines for him, they are shorter, more terse, laconic sentences every single time. And so, in order to sort of balance the show, they lighten everybody but Batman up, and then they darken Batman further. And now the contrast is so wildly different to me that I am basically watching a different character than what we had in BTAS. And I think you can see that in his family interactions. And I think you can see it in a lot of his interactions with young people, with kids who aren't Tim Drake, aren't Robin. And so that's the deal. Is this bad characterization? Not necessarily. Is it bad characterization for this show? Yes, if you care at all about the character continuity. And I'll put a pin in this, but I'll say, I think that goes for Dick Grayson also. I think we honestly get a less mature Dick Grayson in this than we ended BTAS with. And that's the short one on Nightwing.
Yeah, so a couple things to that. One, yeah, I really appreciate you digging up that example with those interviews because I do think that context is really important to understand exactly how these shows are produced and exactly what the studio executive influence is. Sometimes there were times where it seemed like they had free reign to do whatever they wanted, like with BTAS, whereas it sounds like later the studio was kind of tightening the grip a little bit. It's also part of what resulted in Batman Beyond was they were doing New Batman Adventures and an executive came in and said, we want young Batman. And then they threw the idea of, Batman Beyond out there. So, so like it is, those sorts of stories are always really, really fascinating to me because these are the notes and the directions that really shape the core of what this is. Now, so I think that's good context. I also think that one thing you said that really stuck out to me there, that would have been more compelling and maybe alleviated some of the larger issues. I'm okay with the characterization we wind up with. I just think maybe if it had been more of a transition versus a light switch sort of thing. I also think you're right about the Bat family, because what has become very apparent to me in this rewatch of the new Batman Adventures is they're pretty much perpetually a dysfunctional Bat family. Which I'm not against. I'm not against the dysfunctional Bat family, because I feel like that's most actual families, and I think there's a lot of room for really rich character drama there. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. But also, you know what else is good is whenever you can contextualize that through. But also, they love each other and they are a unit, a family unit fighting crime. Like, we really don't get very much of that at all in this series. So again, less so than I remembered when we started doing this rewatch altogether. So I think this drama we see in this episode would have landed so much better if we had seen what a happy Bat family looked like first, for us to really appreciate the tragedy that the dysfunction brings about, which leads into Batman Beyond. Because what we have now definitely seems like it's a sudden gear shift that does not feel organic or earned. So I say all to say, maybe we do agree, Joshua. Maybe we haven't disagreed this whole time. It's all about just figuring out where the connective tissue is or isn't. Because I think it could have been done much better. The whole thing.
Yeah, no, I think that context, again, I am usually like death of the author, what I see is what matters, but this is legitimately a place where I have wondered if I'm seeing things that aren't there, you know? I mean, they're clearly very real to me, and that's, as I have mentioned on previous podcasts, but to find out that they made that specific choice on purpose and that it probably led to some unintended consequences. Now, that's me adding on to what they said, right? Because they were talking at the time. But we know that this crew has taken, creative decisions that went a little sideways on them. We'll talk more about this when we get to Justice League, but the first season of Justice League, Superman's a chump because they needed to establish that these were big, scary villains. But after the 47th episode where Superman goes down in one punch, somebody went, guys, we might have overdone it. You know, I mean, so there's no shade. Like, I now understand why they made the decisions they made with Batman. And I don't even think that they are bad decisions per se, but I do think, they roll out into unintended consequences. And they are unintended consequences that start to look like intended consequences when you go to Batman Beyond. Like, knowing a little bit about the timeline of how this happened is valuable to figure out. Like, because I agree with you. If they were a family that did not get along all the time, but still loved each other and realized how valuable this found family was, especially in the face of many of their personal tragedies, but they still have problems and don't get along, A++. Once we get to Batman Beyond, that possibility is utterly undermined. It can never be gotten back. It's gone. It's not just gone, it's beaten to death and dumped in a dumpster and then lit on fire. Like, we cannot get a happy Bat family back once we get the context that Batman Beyond brings to the picture.
Well, and here's what I'll say. I'm okay. I personally am okay with the Bat family ending in tragedy. I think it's sad, but I also don't think it's like it's just a creative decision. I don't think it's a wrong one. I find that there's some really cool stories that come out of it. But my biggest problem is that it doesn't feel as earned. It doesn't feel as, and like, because if you're going for the tragedy, which is what they really are going for, I mean, especially when we get to, Batman Beyond, Return of the Joker type stuff, which I really like that movie. We'll get to it, but I really like it. But the tragedy is ultimately undermined because we don't have like that status quo to fall back on, because in the new Batman Adventures, they're pretty much perpetually dysfunctional. It's very rare they're all in the same episode working together. So, again, larger universe conversation. It all sort of points back to this episode, because this episode I feel like is designed to set that up, and it really doesn't do it effectively. Again, I think largely because we only see half the story, and we don't get to see more adventures of Happy Bat Family.
I think we can actually point to one specific subplot from this episode that demonstrates, I think, exactly what you're talking about. And that is the lookout who becomes a night watchman, right? So one of the many things that horrifies Dick that he's apparently never seen happen before, even though he and Bruce have been fighting crime together for who knows how long, is that he sees Batman have to scare this guy into giving him information right in front of the guy's kid. Now, I'm not going to make a claim to you that is a Batman's a good dude moment. I don't think it is. Like, I think it's specifically not a very good moment. And it's a place where we could have seen him say, I was making difficult decisions that I, at least on some level, regret. Like, I'm glad we stopped the Joker, but did I want to traumatize the child? Of course not. We would have benefited from hearing that from Bruce, not because I think that's unobvious. I think that's baked in, honestly, and we see that at the end, but because so much of the episode is from Dick's perspective, it winds up just making him look like a moral monster with and when we get to the end, when we realize that Bruce Wayne showed up and gave that guy a job and put him back on his feet, all the stuff we've talked about that makes Bruce Wayne also a crime fighter, right? Like the compassionate crime fighter. We don't get any kind of repentance from Dick. And what we hear from Tim is, looks like Batman actually had a heart. Who'd have thought he had one? That is bad. Like, that is garbage. You're literally an orphan off the street that he took in and gave not just like a roof and shelter and food, but a purpose. And You're talking to another orphan that he did the exact same thing to. And in your flashback, you're going to be talking to a young woman who does not have the same kind of tragedy and is not an orphan, but to whom he gave purpose and support. Not to mention all the many episodes we've seen where kids love Batman because they understand Batman is there for them. Much like Wu-Tang Clan, Batman is for the children.
So, okay. A couple things I want to hit on there, because I'm really glad you brought up that subplot, because that was the one thing we get where it's like again, it's still from Dick's POV, but you're like, oh, see, this is Batman sort of doing the right thing, even we don't see him do it on screen. I wish we could have gotten his POV on some of this stuff, because here's the thing. At the end of the day, guys, he's fighting crime. And I know Dick Grayson's graduation is really important, but when the Joker's like, hey, I'm going to blow up the whole city, like, you got to have some grace of like, he's probably just working and it sucks, but that's kind of the territory. He's working so that you guys can go celebrate at the graduation. Batman calling up Dick and making him go away from his date with Barbara, that really sucks. It really, really does. And from Dick's POV, it's like, well, screw this. I'm tired of this. Okay, that's a totally reasonable reaction to have. But also, he's like, I don't make the schedule, because guess what? He doesn't make the schedule.
Right.
None of that is unreasonable. That's why I'm thinking, like, yes, it's kind of harsh, but none of it is bad. Like, it's not bad dad for bad dad. Yeah, exactly.
Change the relative reasonableness of the whole thing. And I don't think that that's very good characterization of Bruce on the phone, ordering him to get there by a certain time and damn the torpedoes, I don't care if you have a date. I don't think that's good characterization. I don't think that Bruce Wayne would do that. But he would be very, no, you need to be here. I need you. I think that's what he would say to Dick. This is big, and I need you. And I'm sorry that it's all messed up, and I'm sorry I missed your graduation. But, buddy, this is big. And I think that Dick could be upset about that while also recognizing it's all necessary.
Well, it's part of the job. It's part of the job.
Yes. But we do this messy and honestly kind of poor, I think, characterization of Batman if we care about continuity, right? We get this kind of poor characterization to justify Dick throwing all these fits. I don't hate where we get, Caleb. I think that's the part we actually agree. Where we get is interesting and really sets the table for potentially interesting stuff. But the way that we get there is to break characters so we can put them together in a different shape. And that is always going to strike me as fairly lazy writing.
Yeah. And again, I'm not, I think you could have done it. I think you easily could have, well, easily is probably not the right word, but you could have transitioned, you could have transitioned the characterization from Batman the Animated Series into what we get here. It just, you can't just do it at the flip of a switch. Like you have to do it over time. It's an arc. It's not just, it's not a light switch. So I think that's the biggest thing. It just feels like a hard shift that is not organic in any way. And I also, again, just want to reiterate, like Batman even interrogating the dad in front of the kid when the Joker's got the whole city hostage with a bomb. I mean, again, it's not the right thing to do, but I also just, to your point, like this is part of the job and
difficult decitions, right?
And it doesn't mean that Batman's happy about it. It doesn't mean he goes home and's like, just, oh yeah, I got the job done. It's great. I mean, it's just, it comes with the territory. So I feel like everything Dick is upset about, to your point, is something, there's no way he hadn't seen this before. And B, it's what you guys do. It's what you guys do. And it's a high pressure situation.
it can still cause drama. It can still hurt Dick's feelings that his dad wasn't at his graduation. He can both be understanding about it, like how it happened, and be upset that it happened. Like, I think that's also a really reasonable drama-filled conversation because they're both right. Like, they're both correct in that.
Exactly.
How do we live together as father and son when we both have this level of valid point? You know?
Well, yeah, and here's the thing, and this is why I'm circling back to what I said at the top of the episode. There are some things here that could make for more interesting character beats. The Spider-Man, the problem. I have a personal life to balance with my crime-fighting life. That's an interesting thing. And I love the idea that both of them are living in that tension, and their individual tensions crash together, and they disagree. That is great drama. But what we just don't get here, I just really think they do such a bad job at making Batman seem so harsh, and then, like, again, uncharacteristically revealed Dick's secret identity to Barbara. Like, that's the decision in this one that I'm just, like, left scratching my head. I was like, okay, we got to have something else for that to make sense, because that is a truly bad dad thing to do.
Yeah, yes. One thing that's really interesting, I don't want to, like, beat this show over the head with comic book choices, because that's not exactly fair. But one interesting thing that they did with Dick in the comics is that when he broke away from Batman, it's pretty on the label that it was Bruce flipping out. Like Dick got shot and it was a shoulder wound. He's fine, but he's laying in bed, you know, resting up, healing. And Bruce comes in and he's like, this is it. We're not doing this anymore. I can't put you in danger anymore. And Dick is like, I'm an adult and you trained me for this. I can do it with you or I can do it without you. And Batman says, you're going to have to do it without me. Now, do I love this? Is it the most airtight characterization? No, but they really position it as a dad freak out, which that's actually okay, right? But the thing is, when Dick leaves and moves from being Robin to Nightwing, it's very much not to be a solo operator. It's to be the leader of the Teen Titans. Or at that point, they were just the Titans, but still. He leaves what's the right word for solitary, but there's two of them? I mean, you know, a solitary existence of two or three, if you count Alfred, right? And moves to this big, sprawling family team dynamic. Now, that's a really good contrast between their personalities. Whereas here, Dick goes through the Batman lens and just turns into baby Batman. And it's like, you don't like what he did to you, and now you're literally doing the same thing. And I think that's a bigger thing to me than even the petulance and the fit throwing about how Dick doesn't come out of this as anything like his best self. Not because I expect everybody to always learn the lesson, but the lesson of don't be like Batman, so I'll be exactly like Batman. What?
Again, potentially interesting nugget there. I do find stories about children who work very hard to escape the shadow of their parents turning into their parents. The irony there, I find pretty compelling if you do it right.
Oh,
this doesn't do it right. This doesn't
do it right. Yeah.
No.
This doesn't do it right. And in fact, undermines most of Dick's points along the way by how Barbara reacts to them. Now, again, you're not wrong. That whole secret identity reveal, it felt like a difficult decision, like in a series of not optimal decisions. Like he picked the least suboptimal decision. But again, I'd like some view into that, you know. But when Barbara really gets it and really understands, and that the narrative doesn't seem to undermine her, like the narrative doesn't seem to support Dick's position as much as it doesn't support anybody's position. It's just, you know, yeah, it's just when you shake characterizations this badly, lots of stuff suffers, right? Like across the board.
And again, it's just such a bad decision on Batman's part because he reveals information to Dick's girlfriend that is Dick's information to share.
Yes.
So that's a pretty big, in my mind, that's a pretty big betrayal. What this also does, as an unintended consequence that I really feel like you could think through, is it turns Barbara's world a little bit upside down.
It really should.
Bruce Wayne, you know, as it should. And I don't know. I know this is a bigger thing that they don't get as explicit into in Batman Beyond, but it's kind of alluded to that there was some potential romance between Batgirl and Batman. That's weird. It kind of also sets the stage for that a little bit too. I don't think they really go there fully, but it's just like one of those things where by revealing that information, Bruce is essentially dooming that whole relationship, like Dick and Barbara's relationship.
Yes. Like
romantically speaking.
No, I think you're right. And seeing how it goes for, Bruce and Barbara is bad. That's super gross. I mean, honestly, you and I are going to get into this a little more in our next episode of this podcast, but the gender politics of the creators on these shows are painful. Like, they just are. It doesn't always come up, but when it does, oh my gosh, it's rough. And so there's a lot of terrible stuff in the idea of Bruce and Barbara getting together. But when you look at how Bruce's choice very specifically doomed the romantic relationship of Barbara and Dick, and then you know for a fact that he takes up with her in some capacity later down the road, it's not good friend behavior. Man behavior, person behavior. It's bad person behavior.
Well, and again, I want to reiterate, that's why I just wish I could figure out what was, or giving something about why he would make that call.
Yeah.
Because it just is such a selfish behavior. And again, I don't think he thinks of it as selfish, but having to read so far in between the lines.
Exactly.
I think he thinks he's doing Dick a favor. But really, the whole thing makes it about him very quickly.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, he's not really looking out for what Dick wants. He's wanting to ensure that Dick does what he wants. So, but in his mind, he's framing it as, I'm helping him out. And see, that's the sort of like the nut that needs to be cracked, or there's something there that needed more context for me to really buy it.
Yeah.
And with the way this sort of like shifts the gears for this characterization and where these characters go down the road, it just feels like really shaky grounds to stand on.
Yeah, I think that's the place where I have always agreed with you that there was like really interesting grist for the drama mill and for the story mill in these decisions. And the decisions didn't sit right with me. And one reason they didn't sit right with me is I have a different conception of Batman in my head. What I'm coming to realize on this rewatch, and on you really making me inspect my opinions, which is wonderful, is that I'm realizing I do have a different version of Batman in my head, and that is influencing my feelings on this characterization. But the fact that the characterization is lazy and short-circuited is definitely hurting this execution more than my personal preferences.
And I'll just lay out there, too, this has had me also interrogate my opinion about this, and I still am ultimately satisfied with on the universe level, but the way they got there was kind of antithetical to what makes this universe as good as it is. Because normally they lay out seed, they plant them, and they build on them down the road, and it works really well. This is one of those instances where they made a really poor studio influence decision that they build on later, and that's why it does feel a lot shakier than I had previously thought, because it is a huge character swap from the original B-Task to where we get here.
I think the best thing that we can say about these creative people is that they really think ahead, even if they don't have like a worked out plan. You know what I mean? Like, they leave themselves not Easter eggs for us to get all excited about as nerds, but they leave themselves seeds that they can come back to if they have time or energy. And in this case, they did the opposite of that. And maybe we would judge them less harshly if they did a less good job of that the rest of the time. I don't know. But in this case, I think our expectations of their ability to tell a story with solid characterization makes it stand out when they just don't do that.
Well, and the other piece of that, too, is, guys, studio executives having notes can really screw stuff up.
That's the truth.
Sometimes it can make things better, too. It goes both ways. But based on what you kind of talked about here, and I know we'll get to this conversation later, but the way that Batman Beyond came about was just like some executive was like, we want to change all this stuff. And they had to figure out, well, we don't want to throw away everything we've already built. So
right.
how can we change our plan to make it work? And sometimes it works really successfully. Other times, like right here, not so much.
All right, Caleb, I think that was a really valuable discussion about bad Bat Dad and bad characterization and all that good stuff. And it's been a long time coming, and I'm glad we're finally here. And it's not exactly over. Obviously, this is going to play out through other shows. But I think after a lot of contention and close watching and discussion, we've come to a comfortable place where we've made sense of it. And that is not nothing. Valuable stuff. And that's really, I think, the core of what you and I always wanted to do with this podcast. So that's pretty fantastic. And it almost feels anticlimactic for me to do this, but as we do in every episode, let's assume that the people at home enjoyed this as much as we did. What other alternate media recommendation do you have for them? What should they be watching, reading, playing, or experiencing?
Well, Joshua, I just want to say first, I'm glad that we had this really discussion, because I remember when we were early on, we were like, there's a thing we disagree on. That's really important. It's really important. But you know what? I feel like we built a bridge here, and really, not only did we interrogate our own opinions, we
and
I
change
feel like
them.
And changed. No, it's true. They have evolved, both of us, and I feel like we're better friends now. So this is very good. This is a meaningful conversation. Thank you for being willing to have it with me. So with that said, I had a hard time with alternate media recommendations, so I started thinking about bad movie dads. But I wanted to find bad movie dads that were well done. And one that came to mind is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And I'm sure many of our listeners, if not most or all of them, have probably seen it. But I would encourage you to go back and watch it and specifically focus on the father-son relationship, because the thing that really stuck out to me in this episode that did not get really done super well was interrogating the idea of, how do I be the best I can at the thing I do while also being a good parent? And spoilers, it's really, really hard to do. And I do feel like, and that's in any career, by the way, whether it's crime fighting or archaeology, or teaching, that is. I'm not a parent, but if I was a parent, I would expect that would be a thing that I'd have to think about. And I think Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade does a really good job at really digging into, hey, my dad made a lot of decisions that super negatively impacted me. Sometimes they were selfish, sometimes they were selfless, but were not communicated well. And sometimes they were just miscalculations. But at the end of the day, the dad still loves Indy, and Indy still loves his dad, even if their relationship can never be the same because of how his father chose to handle his career decisions. So with that said, I encourage you to watch Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade again. Joshua, how about you? What alternate media recommendations do you have for this episode?
I have to tell you, yours is so good, so well thought out, that I'm almost ashamed. I don't feel that I'm phoning this in, but I'm making a little bit of a spurious connection. So we've never recommended, that I recall anyway, we have never recommended music on this show as an alternate media recommendation, and I'm going to. And the reason I'm going to is because I'm a little bit petty in this case. And the pettiness that I'm going to have is that this show, or at least its predecessor leading into the show, has done so much work to make Batman such a pinnacle of hope and opportunity for children, not just Dick and Tim and Barbara, but all kinds of secondary characters throughout. And then for them to come in here and have Dick Grayson in the moment just assume that Batman is doing the worst possible thing as far as a child is concerned, very upsetting to me. And so, as I mentioned before, I think Batman and Wu-Tang Clan have exactly one thing in common, and that's there for the children. There for the children. And for anybody who doesn't get that joke, in 1998, Wu-Tang Clan was robbed of Best Rap Album of the Year by Sean Puffy Combs. And Old Dirty Bastard, member of the Wu-Tang Clan, bum rushed the stage, took the microphone, and insisted that Wu-Tang is the best and Wu-Tang is for the children. And the album that was snaked, the album that was robbed that year, is Wu-Tang Forever. So that's my alternate media recommendation, friends. If you have not spun Wu-Tang Forever in the past or recently, get it done. Tremendous album. Absolutely the best rap album of 1998. Don't let the Grammys fool you. That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb's at CMastersTalk and I'm at Joshua Unruh, and the hashtag is animated discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
Well, Joshua, I'm the editor-in-chief and a contributor at the Cinematropolis, a website that specializes in in-depth film critique and analysis. We publish in-depth essays, as well as our podcast, The Cinematic Schematic, where we discuss and dive into all types of films. And you can find those articles, as well as the podcast, right on over at thecinematropolis.com.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
And of course, the links to Patreon, Apple Podcasts, and our recommendations in Twitter are very easy to find in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us for this animated discussion. We'll be back next time to talk about Double Dose, an episode of Superman the Animated Series.
We'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel.